we can all hit the got it button. So let me formally welcome everybody on behalf of both Indigenous Works and our partner and member, Josh Silvertown with Bear Canada, to today's management learning session on the importance of Indigenous resource groups and the benefits to your organization. My name is Kelly Lendsay. Welcome everybody. I'm President and CEO of Indigenous Works, and Josh and I will be leading you through today's management learning session. As we get into this, I've known Josh for many, many years, and I knew him prior to his role at Bear. And, you know, he's one of those Canadians, although he worked in urban Canada, mainly in Toronto, he had great connections to the North. And he had launched one of the most innovative and one of the largest mentorship programs in the North called Dreamcatchers Mentoring. And it was servicing people through the territories, Iqaluit, and the Yukon. And so that's how we got to know each other and became friends and looked at how to expand the mentoring work. So you'd never know he has a PhD in molecular biology, given the extensive community work, engagement work, and interesting things that he has played with over his career. So it's great to have you, Josh. I'm really looking forward to you sharing your ERG experience and bringing some thought leadership on just overall Indigenous engagement strategies. So what we're going to do is I'm going to take you through the first half of this. Then I'm going to pitch to Josh, and he's going to take you through a real life example of their experience building their ERG. And then we're going to open it up to Q&A. So you can type your questions in the Q&A chat as we go along. And then Nicole can synthesize them. And when we get there, we can make sure we touch on them and we can open it up and you can come off mute and ask questions as well. Okay, so I think most of us know that routine. Let's get rolling. Most of you know, of course, who we are. We are Indigenous Works. I started in 1998, but we were incorporated in 1999. So next year, 2024, will be the 25th anniversary since our incorporation date. So it'll be a silver anniversary. Mandate has never changed. It's about increasing Indigenous engagement in the economy. We launched a charity, Kachita, which is focused on Indigenous youth, and Luminary is about advancing Indigenous innovation with our academic and especially business school community in Canada. So here's what we're going to cover today. How do you create an Indigenous resource group or employee resource group? What are some of the best practices and models, structural characteristics? What are some things that we could do in terms of providing direction and mandate so you could get started? Or if you already started, how you can expand the impact of your ERG. And then we're going to turn to a real live example with Josh Silvertown from Bear, talking about River, their business resource group. So let's start with what is an ERG. An employee resource group, some refer to as affinity groups, resource groups, networks group, business groups. They are this resource group. They're volunteer-based generally. They are employee-led. So often the diversity, equity, and inclusion VP or director or HR has responsibility or executive responsibility. They're supported by the organization. They can address many common interests that cut across different resource groups and HR and engagement issues. Allies, of course, are welcome, and they really got their start in the early 60s where groups started to come together. Now, we've heard, as we do our baseline assessments, that we've heard from people that talk about the need to listen to their people. And so often they get started with small groups. It does put workload on people, whether it's an Indigenous ERG or any general ERG. So you need to, you need to pay attention. We're going to be talking about some of those things that you need to pay attention to as you build it. Generally, you find that you're going to find people who are pretty passionate about their journey, the journey of their colleagues. their fellow employees and the organization. But many people have said they just didn't know how to get started. So by the end of this session, you're going to know how to get started to building your ERG or taking your existing one to stellar levels of performance. So in terms of, they do create a safe space. They can invite both Indigenous and non-Indigenous people into an Indigenous ERG. Information, education, and support. Those are some of the general themes that you see coming from ERGs. And we're going to go a bit deeper in terms of how you can structure what we call sort of the benefits of the ERG. There are different examples, and what we are going to do is we're going to poll our own members to find out who has an ERG, and we're going to sort of create a directory for you and see if they would be prepared. But we've got groups like Bear, Scotiabank, Cargill, Hydro One. There are many others. I'm estimating that probably at least a third of our members have an employee resource group, but we're going to find that out. And one of the follow-ups is put together almost like a library of examples. So let's talk about the formation of an ERG. So where and how is it located in the organization in terms of the corporate responsibility and the organizational accountability? Who is the executive champion? What is the business case for your ERG? You don't want it just positioned as a social case, or what would be considered a soft practice. There is a business case. There is a value proposition that you should be able to articulate and explain to people. There's an onboarding process to orientate people to the work of your ERG, and you can undergo formal performance reviews and evaluations of the ERG. That ensures that it's going to be aligning with your key performance indicators, metrics, and outcomes. So in terms of metrics, there are different metrics that different ERGs develop and emphasize throughout their growth. One is in the area of employee impact. You can use them to advise on your satisfaction and engagement surveys to really look at your engagement drivers. They can help inform on human resource, recruitment, referral metrics. And then you can look outside the HR world to things like social media, communications, marketing. What are the metrics that the ERG could be informing on? As you start to design, I call this the structural characteristics of a successful ERG. So this is about design. How do you create purposeful design? So you need an ERG that communicates the guidelines. If you're policy driven, you'll want to align this with your policy features in your organization and the procedures for when and how do you get involved in an ERG. You want to describe the mission vision. Again, back to the business case. What's the business alignment? Budget. What's the financial support for this ERG? What's the time in lieu that's being provided? And especially if there's workloads attached to some of the work of the ERG. You need an executive sponsor, and sometimes we're seeing plural executive sponsors. So rather than just one, how can executive sponsors get involved and it cuts across different parts of the organization? I think you want an open and transparent membership, an opportunity to join. Again, shared responsibilities in terms of what are the things that they need to do and the organization or company needs to do, and how can you pool resources to have a very successful ERG strategy. So those are some of the structural characteristics that you want to be thinking about as you get into the design. You need a communication strategy. Support is key. You have to look at how are we communicating the ERG internally amongst our employees, and how are we communicating our work of our ERG externally in our annual reports, our newsletters, with our customers, and so on. You've heard us use this term enterprise-wide approach when we do a baseline assessment on the inclusion continuum, the 7-stage roadmap to becoming an employer of choice. You can also apply this systems-wide or enterprise-wide approach to your ERG. Do not isolate them. How do they connect with diversity, equity, and inclusion? How do they connect with the corporate social responsibility agenda? What about your broader community outreach strategies, HR, and now an emerging focus on ESG? every week I'm seeing something on ESG. There was a recent report that something like 70% of CEOs are part of their remuneration is now based on their ESG metrics and performance. So we're starting to see, I think, that this practice of an employee resource group can actually connect across these enterprise-wide areas. Lastly, stakeholders. What are other client organizations that you could be connecting with? So a people focus, but are there other organizations that you might want to consider and have them networked into your ERG strategy? So as you start to utilize and get the benefits from your ERG, you've now got, you've aligned the mission and vision. You got to look at how to recognize and reward them. We talked about maybe going from one executive to 2 or 3 executive sponsors. How do you recruit and orientate people? Is it done in the onboarding process? Is it done on an annual basis? And how do you recruit and promote people to your ERG? You could use social networking groups, mentorship programs, which are very, very common, especially with Indigenous employees and inside programs. How can you use the mentorship program as a stepping stone towards recruiting people to your ERG cluster? And finally, again, looking at how do you link with partner organizations that could inform on your strategies. So I want to just summarize what we've now covered so far is why and the what of ERGs. We've looked at the formation of them. We've looked at structural characteristics, how to utilize them, the communications side, and the overall benefits. You can also take a deeper dive and look at some models of ERG. I'm going to just share 3 with you. This one is the maturity model of your ERG. And this maturity model basically, again, cuts across, it's enterprise-wide. You're looking at different business categories. You're looking at the operations side, talent, culture, business impact, and community relations. It has 5 growth stages in terms of maturity model, from the foundation, which is the building. You formalize, you operationalize, you integrate, and the dynamic stage, which would be ongoing performance. And you're going to get a snapshot of this when Josh talks about River. So I thought this model was interesting, is that you can actually look at your design to say, we could build it upon some existing research and literature, and this is one of them, the maturity model. Here's another model, an ERG missions model. We all know what vision and missions are about. This is a mission-based approach. It's Dr. Robert Rodriguez. And he basically says there are 4 key missions to an ERG: the commerce, the community, the culture, and the career aspects. And then within that circle, you've got things like collaboration, external focus, affinity impact, systems, professional development, the talent engine, market penetration, and consumer insights. So there's a second model. By the way, you're all going to have access to these slides, so you can go Google more information on this, but there's another framework. And if it's not exactly this framework, it helps you think about what framework would work for our company, for our organization. A third one is thinking about your ERG in terms of building not just models, but very, very specific program competencies. So in this case, we've learned from our members that we do our baseline assessments that the ERG has become almost a strategic tactic for expanding cross-cultural capabilities. Now, this whole area of cultural safety, cultural competencies continues to grow. In fact, there was a study done by RBC on what are the key competencies that are going to be needed in the workforce over the next decade. And one of the top 5 was cross-cultural capabilities. So I think this area of cultural competency, the ERG can inform on that. It will build cultural competencies. So again, I think the purpose and the objectives of ERG can be expanded, and the modeling can say we're going to develop and enhance and target other areas like our cultural competencies. So you can start to see that the rigor of an ERG takes a greater prominence in an organization and in its overall sort of business modeling. So now on to a real live example. So Josh at Silvertown at Bear is, of course, he's going to talk about how do you go from a concept to a plan to program implementation. And he'll even talk about how River was named and branded, because it was just a concept at the time when Josh reached out to me. We were talking again here about how do you climb the inclusion continuum. They were starting to identify specific practices and strategies. The ERG was one of them. And you're going to hear Josh's story about how they started to design and implement that. So Josh, over to you, my friend, to take us through the story of River.
Excellent. Kelly, thank you so much. Thanks for the introduction, and thanks for inviting me and Bayer to speak here today. Before I begin, I just want to let you know I'm working and living and playing in Toronto. We're meeting virtually, but here I am in Toronto, and I want to acknowledge the territory of the Anishinaabe, the Huron-Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and Ojibwe Chippewa peoples, the land that is home to the Métis, and most recently the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. So again, Kelly, Nicole, Subhash, and Paula, and others at Indigenous Works, thanks for having me. And the reason why I agreed to join today is to share the passion and the pride that we have of setting up, conceptualizing, setting up what we call a business resource group at Bayer. Next slide, please, Kelly. So the inclusion and diversity movement at Bayer is ingrained in our culture. We have a very deep I&D movement right now at Bayer, and every Canadian or every organization at Bayer, whether it's Canada, the US, or other countries around the world, are embracing the I&D culture. And we have, Kelly's called it an ERG. At Bayer, we call it a BRG, a business resource group. And I'm showing you 6 logos of the 6 BRGs that we have at Bayer. It's not just an Indigenous focused BRG we have, but we have other ones on LGBTQ+. We have one on Black, supporting Blacks advocates to Black employees, one on invisible and invisible disabilities, supporting women, multi-generational employees, and of course, River. So we developed the concept for River in late 2020. And the reason why we created it was to address the gap for creating the cultural and educational awareness of Indigenous peoples in Canada. It's an important piece to our I&D culture and philosophy, and this was something that we wanted to address. We have Indigenous employees at Bayer. We work with Indigenous communities across Canada, so it made sense for us to complement our I&D movement and journey by starting with River. And we're on this. It's evolving every year on what this means for our company. Next slide, please. I put this together as a bit of a showing you the steps towards where we are today. And this is something that I put together as sort of a guide and to help people understand the complexities and the story for what can happen for a BRG. So as Kelly mentioned, every BRG, ERG starts with an executive sponsor. There needs to be someone in the organization who pounds their fist on the table and says, yeah, we need this in our organization, because if you don't have the resources and access and someone to help remove barriers to get things done. So we had an executive sponsor who wanted this BRG, and that really helped get things off the ground. They then have to find a lead to move this. And so I was approached, as Kelly mentioned, I do have some background working in Canada's 3 Northern Territories and brought a bit of that experience with me. And so with our executive sponsor, we proceeded to develop River. And it wasn't River when we started, it was called Indigenous BRG at the time, because we hadn't come up with the name yet. We then worked through member recruitment. It was reaching out through our internal Yammer channels, it was through email, it was word of mouth. How can we find people that share the passion of starting at the ground floor and building out the concept? And so when we did that, we had about 30 people that put their hands up and said they want to be a part of this. And to be honest, we spent about 2 or 3 months just figuring out what are we doing? What is the problem we're solving? What is our purpose? And that was okay. We had people expressing themselves. They were passionate. They were sharing stories. We needed to align on what that was, and then that's how we built a foundation for where we wanted to go. So that early piece was critical in getting things off the ground. Once we figured out what our purpose and our mission and our objectives were, we then created a brand, and we needed to develop a brand because we needed to create awareness about what we were doing across the organization. And having some marketing people on our team, we put together a number of ideas, and we came up with River. River is a metaphor for communication, transportation, a very important symbol of Indigenous communities historically in Canada. And it also allowed us to have a nice acronym. So raising Indigenous voices through education and reconciliation. And from there, we then worked on developing our working groups. So we have 30 people. We have 3 different working groups focused on education and awareness, on events and communication, and a third on strategy and reconciliation efforts. And that then dictated our BRG structure, which I'll talk about on another slide. We developed tactics, a budget, we executed, and we ensured that these were able to be measured in some way, because at the end of the year, we have to report to our country leadership team about what was done, and having successes that can be measurable for not just improving our I&D journey at Bayer internally, but also externally with the business does help. We celebrate those successes, and we've been planning now for 3 years on our journey with River. I do want to mention that from the very beginning and throughout our journey and our continuity plan with River, Indigenous Works has been a critical partner for us. I think it's okay to say that when you start a BRG, you have to accept the fact that you're not going to know everything. There are sensitivities that you need to bounce off of somebody. You need to understand, Kelly talked about cross-cultural capabilities. You need to consult people on aspects that you're not going to know, or people may not know in your organization. That's okay. So consulting with third parties like Indigenous Works has been instrumental in helping us with our success throughout River. Next slide, please. These were the objectives that River landed on. Feel free to use this as inspiration for your own ERG in your organization, but we themed them in 3 different ways. So foundational, which is all about building the knowledge and cultural awareness of Indigenous communities and history and their contributions to society. A lot of people at Bayer don't know a lot about that, and that's okay. Some people do, but a lot of people don't. And we work to and continue to build that awareness and education among our employee base. We have an internal strategy to support the development of what we call a cross-enterprise framework. So we want to help build an Indigenous engagement strategy in different departments of our company, from communications to procurement to marketing to corporate social responsibility. It goes on, and if there's ways for us to build that in, great. And the third is external engagement. How do we develop an external dialogue to explore collaborations, partnerships, and drive employment opportunities for Indigenous Canadians at Bayer? Next slide, please. This is our structure, and we kind of, we're using a circle as a symbol here, but we have 3 different levels of involvement. Because when people in your organization say, hey, I'd love to join your ERG, the first question they ask is, how much time does this take? I have a day job, right? Well, how much time does this take? So the 3 levels we have are, you can be a leader on the team, which is like be a leader of one of our working groups. You can be a member where there's an expectation that you're involved in one of the working groups and you support the execution of what we're doing. And the third is just what we call Friends of River. You want to be an ally, you want to join the speaker events, you'd like to receive emails. These are the 3 different ways that people can be involved in different capacities of effort and time. Next slide, please. I wanted to highlight a few of our examples of things that we've done at Bayer, and I'm sharing this because I'm proud of the work that the team has done, and we've gotten some great feedback from people that have benefited from this. So we've developed internal learning, self-directed learning guides. We've developed and vetted a number of resources for people to learn. You know, someone says, I'd like to learn more about Indigenous communities and history. There's a lot out there, and people need some validated, credible resource to go to. So we've got that, and we've shared that with our colleagues. We've also built a guidance for how and when and who should deliver a land acknowledgement. This is now part of our culture. We deliver it in our meetings, internally and externally, and we have a guide on how to do that. We have done a number of guides on podcasts and reading, summer reading lists and so forth, and that's been really beneficial for our team. Externally, we're proud to say that we've been working with Indigenous Works' Luminary initiative to help support the agri-food sector and the Indigenous perspectives in that, as Bayer is highly involved in crop science. We have communications through magazines where we've made efforts to highlight and showcase Indigenous farmers on our in our articles and marketing efforts. And also we've worked where appropriate to procure materials and products from Indigenous suppliers. And one example I wanted to highlight here is we have an internal award that's in the form of an Inukshuk, and we've now been procuring that from an Inuit, a certified GTA Inuit art supplier from an artist in Nunavut who supplies that to us here in Toronto. The proceeds of our Orange Shirt Day goes to a charity of choice, and our team selected Water First, which is a Ontario-based charity that supports ensure clean water access to Indigenous communities. So that was from the proceeds of our Orange Shirt Day. Next slide, Kelly. My second last slide here. Finally, on our accomplishments, we have facilitated across the country reconciliation dialogue sessions. I'm not sure if you know, but Reconciliation Canada has developed what they call the kitchen table guide to reconciliation, and it gives sort of a how-to on how to have a sensitive conversation around reconciliation. And so we've been training the trainer to have these types of dialogue sessions across our organization in teams of 5 to 20 on reconciliation. It's been a very successful program we've been doing, and it helps as another way to create education and awareness. And finally, we are, I'm pretty excited about this, but we're working with Four Seasons Reconciliation, which is partnered with First Nations University of Canada to provide online certification for a course that we are providing to Bayer employees. So that's a great initiative we're doing this year, and really excited to see the outcomes of that. Next slide, Kelly, it's my last slide. So these are Josh's 5 keys to a BRG success that I wanted to impart with you. And you've heard this theme through what Kelly has spoken about and some of the things I've said, but the first is when you're starting a BRG, and even as you continue on your journey, is to ensure that you have engagement and support from your organization's executive sponsor. This is absolutely critical to ensure that you have access to the resources, money, and time to get this off the ground and continue its success. Take time to align on your group's purpose and objectives. If people are not bought in on that common purpose, and you're going to lose engagement of your members very quickly. The third is, when you're starting out, ensure that you have tangible and achievable projects that are not too big that people get disenchanted by. You need to do things that are small so you can have these small wins and celebrate them. And those small wins and celebrations really help build momentum and a sense of accomplishment among the volunteers who are driving that within your organization. Make sure that you recruit and actively retain the people that are on your team that are passionate and energized, who represent a cross-section of different functions and departments across your organization. If everybody's from the same department or the same city, it's not going to be a great representation of who you are as a company in Canada. So, I mean, maybe you're only located in one province or one city, that's fine, but make sure you have that diversity that brings that diverse perspective and opinion to ensure that the initiatives are going to be appropriate for everybody in your organization. And finally, work with external organizations such as Indigenous Works that can help you with that resource, expertise, and knowledge to help you get that off the ground. So hope that's been helpful for you. And again, Kelly and everybody in Indigenous Works, thank you for your support and inviting Bayer to be a part of this today.
Spot on, man. Josh, great content. I would note that you started in 2020. So really in 2021, 2022, just over 2 years, pretty impressive track record of real programs and services. Josh, I remember there was sort of a funny moment because you had 2 different brands, and remember we were testing it for you. I forgot River, and then there was another one. I forgot the. You're on mute. Do you remember the name?
Yeah, I can't recall.
It
wasn't too memorable, so it doesn't really matter.
Well, what was so we sort of tested River, and what was cool about it is that it's an element for First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. It's water. So again, so often trying to find, when you look at brands and you look at the connection to cultural values, river, water worked. So that's where they eventually landed on. And there's also this idea of as you pointed out, if you look at the river, the whole Hudson Bay, I mean, the rivers were the waterways to connect opportunity and people and so on. So lots of good sort of teachings from the element. I think what also is you really sort of articulated many of those models and those themes. You know, you talked about foundational objectives, the internal, the external, and you're sort of going on a deep dive with our friends at the First Nations University of Canada, which is just great. They've got some great resources there. So look, folks, I'm just going to conclude here. Just hang on. There we go. So just to conclude, and then we're going to go to the Q&A and get your questions and comments coming forward here. But you can really see that in conclusion that an Indigenous ERG is a strategic investment. It's part of the business case. There are multiple tactics that you could be approaching, but take a lesson from Josh. They took 3 months to really listen and think about what are the things that you can and where do you start? What are the things that we could be doing? And then you can't do everything at once. Think of this over a timeline over 3 years in terms of what you can be doing. It will improve the performance and the workplace inclusion conditions. It will enhance the climate of your workplace, the networking, the community engagement, some of this external work. It's going to identify, we've heard from others how it's helped identify potential leadership people to grow into senior management positions in your organizations. And, look at this world of labor market challenges. I think ERGs are going to help solve company challenges, whether it's in HR, branding, reputation management, all kinds of things. ESG, of course, which I mentioned earlier. And it's going to really, I think, bring a robust emphasis to your overall Indigenous engagement strategy. And it's changing the company culture through these champions and these competencies that we talked about. So in today's session, as you sort of leave, you've got a recipe here. You've got some information on how it was done at Bayer. Here are sort of 10 tips and points to sort of amplify what Josh was saying. And you'll be able to have access to this deck, folks, and be able to bring it internally. Maybe this could start to be a working agenda for you to action. As we sort of conclude this and open it up to the Q&A, I just quickly looked and there was one from Morgan, and she said, wouldn't it be great to have a network of members who are doing ERGs? Great suggestion. Josh, we could get other leadership circle members, and some of them I mentioned already, Cargill and others. So it's a community of practice that are doing ERGs, and just get talking amongst them And then we could share that information with companies that are at the beginning stages of wanting to start. And for those in the network where Morgan is going, they can amplify their efforts and learn from each other. Oh, you're doing that. I didn't know you were doing a certification program. I didn't know you were, linked into Luminary as an external initiative. So I like the sharing, learning, and peer learning between ERGs. So it's a great suggestion, Morgan. And I think that's a good way to open up the discussion. So I'm going to stop sharing here. And so Morgan, thanks for that. Nicole, I'll turn to you to pose some.
Perfect. So we've got a series of them. I'm not going to go in chronological order from when they came into the chat, simply because there's a kind of a flow that would help fill out some of the things. So we've had some questions from Teresa. One was already answered, and that's both Indigenous and non-Indigenous employee members can join the ERG. She also asks, did employees need to gain permission to join the ERG? So we can start with that.
This is directed to Bayer. I don't think people need a explicit acceptance or approval of that from their manager. It's a good practice to let your manager know. And I think the manager would be very supportive and happy that they would do that. We all know that people's workloads ebb and flow with different times of the year. And so people do have permission to pull back from the BRG as an active member to be a passive member, then come back when their workload changes. But it's certainly encouraged that people get their manager approval. And because it's part of the culture of your organization, it should be certainly endorsed.
Brilliant. And then follow up to that, did managers need convincing to allow employees to join?
I haven't heard of any examples like that. I think, the IND culture at Bayer is quite strong, and everyone's trained to build this as part of what we do. And so I think everybody's bought into the importance of this. If people are not, then I think that does require a bit of a conversation to learn more about.
I will add to that. We've worked with some companies, and it's what Josh said. It's the culture. They have a culture of building business resource groups, ERGs at Bayer. We worked with one company. Well, I can say they won't. Cargill, it built an employee resource group, and it was their very first one, and it was the Indigenous one. So it took a little more work to educate all the executive managers about the benefits. It's kind of cool that the Indigenous employee resource group was actually setting the new benchmark at, I think it was at Cargill. So again, you sort of need to look at each company and where it's at in terms of the executive seeing it as part of their business strategy.
Okay. So following up on that, how was safety established within the group so that they could work together effectively?
Yeah. Other questions?
Can you hear me, Kelly?
Yes.
I can.
Okay.
How do you build safety within the ERG?
Yes.
So I think that goes back to the first 3 months where we built a lot of dialogue between the team, and we actually did a really interesting activity. We did this, for lack of a better term, the speed dating thing, where Bayer's got like 2,000 people in the country, right? Now you bring 30 people together. Most of them don't know each other, but they have this common interest. So we did this quick networking thing where we put everybody together in 5-minute meeting slots or 2 minutes to introduce themselves and talk about something. And we gave them a question to talk about. And right away, you're building a connection, a friendship, a relationship. And that really helped to bond us early on. And everyone's really been a part of it for the last 2 years, with the exception of people that leave the company. So it's been awesome that we've been able to build some safety, some psychological safety through those early months of getting to know each other virtually.
Okay, brilliant. Moving on to Orly's question. How do we properly formulate a call out to Indigenous employees to join our ERG, one that will really resonate with these employees?
Yeah, and it's good. It's a great question. Our call out for members went to everybody in the organization, and there are a number. We did a survey when people that were interested in becoming a member of our BRG. We asked them if they would self-identify as being Indigenous, just because we wanted to know. And a handful of them did, and so we do have a lot of people in our BRG that have identified as being Indigenous, First Nation, Métis. Many others are not, and have been involved since. So I think if you want to encourage people with that background to come into the BRG, I think just by virtue of building it to create awareness and education, they might want to join to help support that.
And Cole, I've seen three things. There's the external invite, what Josh mentioned. So you know, newsletters, during the onboarding, you invite people, and that's kind of just a external invitation to join an ERG. The other is a snowballing, where Indigenous people who are already involved snowballing and talk to other, so it's more directed. But what I really like about one of the features of River is that friends component, or the friends circle. Do you remember in Josh's circles that? So some ways, the idea of friends creates a safe space where you can come and learn about the ERG, but you don't have to take on a committee lead role. So you get to sort of socialize, see what it's doing for a year, and then you might step up into one of those higher roles within your ERG. So I thought that friends concept was a good one, and I think that could attract people to sort of observe and watch it and get orientated to the ERG.
Okay, we have some great questions from Elena. Was there already disaggregated demographic data on the number of Indigenous employees, or is it mainly made up of allies?
Yeah, I think we touched on that earlier. At River, there's a large proportion, large proportion of members that have identified as being Indigenous, Métis or First Nation, and a lot of people are not. So we have representation from both.
Okay, and then some other folks are. Oh, go ahead, Kelly.
I think the question, though, I'm just going to add to Elena's question. So some ERGs have been used by the employer to get more Indigenous people to self-declare. So this is a big challenge, right? How do I get my employees to self-declare? People are, you know, look at what's happening with data and how my data is being used. So the ERGs have been a mechanism and a way to explain to people why we're doing self-declaration. They become, you know, sort of marketers and supporters of it. So that is helping to generate better and more demographic data for the employer. So not sure if that's where Elena was going, but just wanted to add that to the question.
Okay.
Fair enough. I didn't appreciate that element of it, but if that is the question, I mean, that's something that we're not measuring that or surveying people about, but I would hope that people do feel comfortable coming out and identifying themselves.
So another question from Elena that some other folks in the chat have asked or have reiterated is of interest to them. Can you speak to the risk of added burden placed on ERGs to speak on behalf of all Indigenous issues? Some may want to just support and others want to influence Indigenous policy and programs. And so in addition to that, and which you commented on, Josh, is ERGs are sometimes used as de facto consultation groups. So just to talk to that.
Yeah, it can. You know, there have been news stories that have come out in the last few years where Bayer responds to externally through communications and has consulted with the River Group on the appropriate sensitivity on that communication. There's been, as I mentioned, about the guidance on land acknowledgements. When our senior leaders are delivering land acknowledgements, in the absence of anything else, they've come to River to help them understand how to deliver it, pronunciations, what should they say. So those are a couple examples where, you know, we are providing a bit of a consultative resource for people. We are we do not say that we are the definitive, credible resource of information. We provide one opinion and perspective, and we too are learning as well on Indigenous related education and policy. But we do provide some starting point for people within our organization that have a question. You know, some of you know that Bayer works in pharmaceuticals. We also work in crop science, and in many cases, our customers are coming from, and patients come from Indigenous communities. And so a lot of our external facing employees come to River with unique questions about collaborations and partnerships and engagement. And in the absence of anything else, they've come to us for guidance, and it's been quite successful so far.
Good response. I think it's a good question, and you could almost, Josh, take the question, Lena's question, and look at it in the design. What are risks? And I think you need to communicate, folks, to the company and the organization, is that an ERG, although it can inform on Indigenous peoples, you got to put a caution there that they don't speak for all Indigenous people. In fact, I think most ERGs would articulate where they see gaps, where they need to do more external outreach. The classic one is that many of these are generally First Nations and Métis centric, very few Inuit or Inuk voices. So a good example would be, you don't want to say you have a voice for the Inuit. That's where you might need some external relations to connect to those communities. Another one would be on geography. If your ERG is made up of all urban Indigenous folks and you want to do something in the north and you don't really have any northern lived experience, that's a risk. You'd want to again address that to say, how do we get those northern voices? So a very good feature to bring out is to look at those types of risks to make sure that you don't accidentally trip up and get to that point. And I think most ERGs are going to be pretty astute when it comes to those things.
Yeah, one comment in the chat here is that it should not be a substitute for investment in Indigenous resources. So noting the time, we have 9 minutes to crank out the rest of them. There's more and more coming. So I think as the conversation is being fulsome here, there are more questions coming. So I'll be sure to put them all, and perhaps we will try to answer them in the response email with the link, but I will try to get to everybody's. So from Diego and reiterated by Ali is, how do you compensate members of your ERG so its members will not be merely doing voluntary work?
It's a good question. So we have, every year we set goals that we work with our managers on. That's how people get assessed for performance. At least within my team and others, we encourage our employees to create goals around how they're supporting DEI within Bayer. And so if they have a performance goal related to that, then that helps them on their measurement at the end of the year. Otherwise, it's voluntary, and that's not a problem. People are highly engaged because they're passionate and believe in the importance of this.
And then follow up to that, do you have advice for Indigenous employees wanting to start an ERG, but have gotten resistance from senior leadership because there's already a DEI community or committee in existence?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, and they might want to talk to other executives of other companies that belong to Indigenous works. Kelly can probably put them in touch, and they might be able to share the benefits of Indigenous focused and other ERG focused groups and how that helps their company.
That's a good, first of all, it's a good suggestion. I think the DEI, if you have a vice president of diversity, equity, inclusion, or a director, what we're hearing from those folks is many of them are saying, hey, we've done a good job in diversity generally. In fact, we've won some awards, but on the Indigenous side of DEI, we're at sort of a D-. We need help. So I'm hoping that if Indigenous people are reaching out to do a startup, maybe Josh, to your idea that if we can show them other recipes of how it's worked, they can get more comfortable and then want to sort of support that Indigenous person's recommendation to move on in Indigenous. And Morgan's idea about a network, that might also be a way to help foster the DEI world to look at the value of Indigenous ERGs.
Okay, this is an interesting question, but probably difficult because of scale of companies and things. But Lauren asks, would love to know if there's benchmarking for budgets that other ERGs have.
We don't. I'll start. We do not, but if we brought together a community of practice of people doing ERGs, we could collect that information. What's your budget? Where did it start? How is it growing? And we could create budget information if the employers were willing to share that. But that's a great question and something that we could gather.
I mean, I can tell you that you can do a lot with little to no budget. The most important resource you have are the people and the ideas. Most of our budget goes to paying honoraria for speakers. You know, we have like 2 or 3 speaker events a year, and you know, you pay those people an honoraria, and that's about it. Yes, we pay a little bit for the training that I mentioned to you with the First Nations University of Canada. That's a bit of a pilot right now, but you can do a lot with very little if you need to.
Brilliant. Gonna try and get through the last ones here. Lauren asks, how have you built the knowledge and cultural competency within your group?
Good question. If you take a little bit of passion and sprinkle in some energy and throw in some motivation, you can get some people to learn stuff. We've educated ourselves. We partnered with Indigenous Works. We've gone to some credible resources to help empower us to know the little that we know, but it's more than we did before. So okay. It's a constant learning.
Wayne, I think we've touched on this, but perhaps if there's other, Wayne asks any thoughts on how to get full buy-in from upper executives. They seem to be stuck in the middle of continuum right now.
Kelly?
Start with the coalition of the willing, number one. So find the ones that are on board. I mean, that's a lesson from the women's movement, right? You got to find the champions. I think, you know, going right to the top. I mean, if this is part of the CEO's responsibility reporting to the board of directors, I think it will get the attention of senior executives to at least, if they're not avid supporters, they will at least not, they won't get in the way, put it that way. They may be passive, but I think you really got to start with those that are champions, build from there, and use a pull strategy. You'll pull people towards this mission and this work. When you start to see the kind of traction that groups like River and other ERGs have attained, I think it changes people. They go, okay, there is a business case. Maybe I was a pessimist at first, but I see it. So I think it's a bit of a marketing education internally to pull those executives that are on the sidelines.
So this is a question kind of about scale and scope. Morgan and Orly both ask, how can you speak to the regional representation of River? How many locations do you have, and how have you encouraged growth and representation from all areas of business? And then Orly follows up with any advice to grow from national to global. And I would love to touch in on the global one because we've had a lot of meetings in the last 2 weeks. This is really starting to come up, but I go to the regional and locations.
Great question. So we don't have a location per se. It's an entity that spans across the country for where Bayer is. We have representation literally from BC to the Maritimes. We try and get representation from the 3 different divisions of Bayer. We have 3 divisions: crop science, pharmaceuticals, and consumer health. We try and get representation from all 3. It's been more weighted on the crop and pharma side, but that's been part of it. But regionally, geographically, it's across the country. And if you get your leadership team at your organization to buy in, which hopefully they will, they can help spread the word and encourage a member recruitment drive to their teams and cascade it across the country.
So folks, I think we've got to the top of the hour. If you have more questions, do not hesitate to reach out to contact us at indigenousworks.ca. So that's contact us at indigenousworks.ca. Keep the feedback coming. To me, you've given us even more ideas about where and how we could take this particular management session and we could amplify it, and we will. So we'll be looking at how to do more work in this area. I want to thank Josh on behalf of all of our members here and our guests that have joined us. You just stellar work. You're on behalf of Indigenous Works, we're making a donation on behalf of you and Bear to Kachita, our Indigenous charity, to help Indigenous youth advance their career potential and human resource potential, including youth with disabilities. So that's our gift to you. And I want to thank you and thank everyone who joined us today. You will have access to this content and this recording that maybe you can take back to your committees. One of the things that Josh and I talked about was, how do we work with our members to take this kind of knowledge to see if it actually gets actioned? So one idea is maybe over the next 6 months, we work with our members to say, were you able to start to either implement an ERG or take your current ERG to a new level of performance, a new level of best of class strategy. So let's talk about that community of practice of ERGs. I think there's something there, and I think it'll be a lot of fun, and it'll really bring out some deeper learning and insights. So thank you very much, folks. You've been stars. I'm speaking to you from the lands of the Kawale Indians, which is the Aqua Calante people, the Toramonte, and the Morongo Indians. Where am I in North America? Palm Springs. I'm in Palm Springs. I'm signing off. You folks enjoy our Canadian winters, and we'll look forward to seeing you next month in our management webinar forums. Make which. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.